Um, and we're going to move on to our final presenter for this session. Robert Elliot. Robert, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right. Robert Elliot is a doctoral candidate in the theology department at Boston College. So we've got 3 for 3 here with Boston College. A student of both philosophy and theology, his dissertation focuses on the political implications of the psychological analogy of the Trinity, using the work of Augustine, Aquinas, and Bernard Lonergan. Robert Elliot is going to be speaking about how decisions pattern experience. Robert.
All right. Thank you, Steve. And thank you, everyone at the Lonergan Society at Marquette for organizing this. I know it's a kind of Johnny and Hannah for putting up with me on your panel. So my paper, as I guess is the case with all papers delivered in 20 minutes, feels sort of schematic. And I wrote this paper, and after I wrote the paper, I realized there are a lot of other questions that I need to ask to address this topic, especially adequately. So I'm going to go through the paper, and I have questions that I could raise at the end, but I'd also love to hear your feedback on what I'm putting forward. Okay, so the title of my paper is How Decisions Pattern Experience. Okay. As is well known, Lonergan, in a few essays in third collection, distinguishes between two vectors, a vector from below upwards and a vector from above downwards. The image of the vectors is introduced, in part, in order to shed light both upon how the meanings and values of a community structure the life of a human being, and upon how God's love radically transforms human existence in order to conform it more fully to the love of God. As is the case with any image, the image of the two vectors has its own limitations. To take but two examples, first, there is no literal above and no literal below when speaking about cognitional operations. Second, the linear movement conveyed by the image, whether that of from below upwards or from above downwards, fails to capture the rich sense of sublation at work in Lonergan's discussion of the relationship between the various levels of consciousness. But I would contend, the most important limitation of the image does not have to do with the quality of its being an image. Rather, the most important limitation, in my opinion, is that the bulk of Lonergan's work in philosophy and in systematics attends to the first vector, the vector from below upwards, and deals only schematically or heuristically with the second vector, the vector from above downwards. My presentation here attempts to shed light on one moment of that second vector, namely the way in which decisions come to pattern human experience. In order to do so, I will speak first about the patterns of experience, then turn to their relation to intelligence, and finally speak about the way in which loving decision comes to pattern experience. Okay. In Chapter 7 of Insight, Common Sense and its Subject, Lonergan defines a pattern of experience as a, quote, set of intelligible relations that link together sequences of sensations, memories, images, conations, emotions, and bodily movements, unquote. The relations linking together the elements of experience, Lonergan claims, are intelligible. That is, even though they cannot be seen, heard, smelled, tasted, or touched, they can be understood and affirmed as realities by interrogating the data of consciousness. Furthermore, what distinguishes one pattern from another pattern are not only the kinds of sensations, images, conations, and so on that enter into a particular kind of pattern, but also the type of relation linking together such elements. When the sensations, images, and memories, and so on, are of food, and when sensations, images, and memories are related to one another through a desire of hunger, then one is in the biological pattern of experience. On the other hand, when the sensations, images, and memories are of geometrical configurations, and the sensations, images, and memories are related to one another through a question for understanding about, to use Lonergan's example, what makes a circle, then one is in the intellectual pattern of experience. My point is this: what distinguishes one pattern from another are not only the elements entering into the pattern, the particular kinds of sensations, images, and memories proper to that pattern, but more importantly, the kind of relation linking together such elements. While the relations linking together the elements of experience are always intelligible, they nevertheless can be either unintelligent, intelligent, or perhaps some blend of the two. When one is in a biological pattern of experience, the quality of the relation linking together one's sensations, images, and memories of food is unintelligent. Such sensations, images, and memories emerge into consciousness outside of any intelligent control, and in doing so, call for or even demand one's attention. On the other hand, when one is in the intellectual pattern of experience, sensations, images, and memories emerge into consciousness under some intelligent control, namely through some question. To use Lonergan's example once again, when asking about what makes a circle, the subject summons a series of images that may be helpful in answering that question. The images emerge into consciousness on the basis of what Lonergan calls suppositions, and what I'll call what-if questions. What if we shrink the hub to a point? What if the spokes have length but no breadth? On the basis of such what-if questions, new sensations, images, and memories emerge into consciousness and become absorbed within the intellectual pattern of experience. Such a pattern, then, is not only intelligible, it is also intelligent. It is dominated by intelligence at work, seeking in this case an answer to the question about what makes a circle a circle. An intelligent pattern of experience, inasmuch as it is dominated by an unrestricted wonder, seeking the truth through various kinds of questions, organizes the elements of experience in such a way as to most easily attain an insight, whether that insight be direct, reflective, or practical or deliberative. Such a patterning of the elements is dominated by intelligence in its search for the truth. As such, the relations linking together the elements are themselves intelligent. At any point, I can answer why I am attending to this sensation, this image, or this memory. The why, remotely, is a question for understanding. Proximally, it is a what-if question, or a supposition. And in between the remote and proximate reasons, there's often another reason, namely some suggestion or clue, on the basis of which I asked the what-if question, or made that supposition. Whether we are speaking about an unintelligent or intelligent pattern, each of the elements arises for a reason, and so its emergence into consciousness is intelligible. However, unlike an unintelligent pattern, all of the elements in an intelligent pattern arise for a reason imminent to consciousness, a conscious and intelligent why. While one cannot always readily state the reason for why one in the moment desires, for example, a slice of pizza, one in an intelligent pattern can readily give a reason for why one is attending to this sensation, memory, or image. Again, the full why has remote, proximate, and in-between constituents, but in an intelligent pattern, each of those constituents is imminent to consciousness. In order to further clarify how all patterns of experience are intelligible, and how there nevertheless remains a distinction between intelligent and unintelligent patterns, allow me to turn to a helpful distinction from the verbum articles, one that shows up in a different context. In the first article, Lonergan distinguishes between the intelligibility of a natural process and the intelligibility of the procession of an inner word, either a concept or a judgment from an act of understanding. The intelligibility of a natural process, Lonergan claims, is potential, passive, specific, and imposed, whereas the intelligibility of the procession of an inner word is actual, active, general, and constitutive, or creative. Though the context is quite distinct, the basic denominations still apply, respectively to unintelligent and intelligent patterns of experience. Inasmuch as the relations linking together the elements of experience are unintelligent, their intelligibility is potential, passive, specific, and imposed. A desire for food, for example, a slice of pizza, may suddenly arise into consciousness and draw one into the biological pattern of experience. One begins to salivate and one begins to feel hunger. Attention is suddenly drawn toward that slice of pizza. Such a relation between images, memories, and sensations arise according to an intelligible pattern. However, the pattern itself is passive and potential, inasmuch as, quote, It is what can be understood. It is not an understanding. It is a potential object of intellect, but it is not the very stuff of intellect, unquote. Again, the pattern is specific. There is an intelligible relation between an image and a desire for pizza on the one hand, and one beginning to salivate on the other. But it is, quote, never the intelligibility of the very idea of intelligible law, unquote. Lastly, the relation is imposed from without. In the moment, one does not have very much say about whether one begins to salivate or not, though I will argue later, through some habituation and decision, such an imposed relation can be altered or changed entirely. On the other hand, inasmuch as the relations linking together the elements of experience are intelligent, their intelligibility is actual, active, general, and constitutive. Here, however, one limitation needs to be mentioned, though I won't dwell on it for long. The limitation is this: the denominations actual, active, general, and constitutive do apply to the relations linking together the elements of experience in an intelligent pattern, but they do so in a lesser or more diminished sense than the way in which they apply to the procession of an inner word from an act of understanding. In an intelligent pattern of experiencing, the relations linking together the elements are active and actual, inasmuch as, quote, it is the intelligibility of intelligence in act, unquote. It is not the intelligibility of intelligence in act as it utters a concept or a judgment, but rather the intelligibility of intelligence in act as it organizes the data, the elements of experience, for the sake of an insight or a series of insights. Again, the intelligibility of the relations linking together the elements is actual rather than potential, inasmuch as an answer as to why I am attending to this sensation, image, or memory is immanent to consciousness. Finally, the intelligibility of the relations is general, not insofar as it is, quote, the pure case of any intelligible law, unquote, but rather insofar as the knowing of any intelligible law depends in part upon the intelligent patterning of the elements of experience. Okay, so I've been speaking of the way in which the relations linking together the elements of experience can be either unintelligent or intelligent. And part of my purpose in doing so was to shed light on the vector from above downward, the vector that receives less than adequate attention, in my opinion, in Lonergan's work. Again, while the relations linking together the elements of experience are always intelligible, a distinction has been made between unintelligent relations and intelligent relations. What I hope to have shown by now is that a pattern of experience is only intelligent when the relations linking together the elements are themselves intelligent. Still, another distinction I think needs to be made. There is, on the one hand, a pattern of experience with loving relations linking together the elements of experience, and on the other hand, a pattern of experience with unloving relations linking together the elements. In what remains, I would like to reflect a little upon the distinction between patterns constituted by loving and unloving relations linking together the elements, and how that distinction can shed light upon what Lonergan calls the vector from above downward. The question for us then is what it means for the relations linking together the elements of experience to be perfected by love. Okay, Lonergan says in Natural Right and Historical Mindedness that the vector from above downwards begins in affectivity, on which, quote, rests the apprehension of values, unquote. Although in several places Lonergan presents the affectivity of a child in relation to his or her parents as the paradigm for the vector from above downwards, such affectivity remains with one over the course of one's life, and new values, never before recognized by the subject as values, can be apprehended by a mature adult through feelings that have never been experienced before. Such values can be radical, establishing a new horizon, and push one to change one's life. Such a new and radical apprehension of value, of course, is present in religious conversion, when the love of God floods one's heart and thereby enables one to apprehend transcendent value. A new horizon is established, and one must now decide whether to remain within that horizon of God's love or to defect from that horizon for the sake of some less intrusive, more comfortable horizon. Upon the revelation of transcendent value, Lonergan writes, quote, there recurs the question of God in a new form, for now it is primarily a question of decision. Will I love God in return, or will I refuse? Will I live out the gift of God's love, or will I hold back, turn away, withdraw?" Unquote. Such a value is disclosed to one in experience, but one must decide what to do about that value and how to deal with the feeling through which that value is apprehended. The decision to live out the gift of God's love is never a one-time decision, even though in the early stages, just after religious conversion, it may seem to be so. It is rather ever precarious, always liable, through subtle or not so subtle changes, to become undone until one finds oneself far from the love of God. Only through a series of transforming, but sometimes mundane decisions, does that love become the living center of the life of the subject, that to which the subject remains committed, despite all else. If one fails to make such decisions, the feeling that discloses transcendent value may still arise sporadically, coming up every now and then to remind the subject in bad conscience that it is on a wayward path, that it is living in unauthentic existence, and failing to live in light of a genuine, all-consuming value. However, the value disclosed through that feeling has been rejected for the sake of some satisfaction, and so the value itself cannot take on the proper role in the life of the subject as that for the sake of which all else is done. Although the value has been disclosed to the subject through some feeling, the subject has made a decision, or really a series of decisions, in order to displace that value from the center of his or her own life, and like the seed that falls on rocky ground, to prohibit that value from ever occupying the center. If that value is to become and remain the center of the life of the subject, every other element of experience needs to be set within the new horizon of that transcendent value, becoming in one way or another subordinated to it. Such a transformation of all the elements of experience does not occur without cooperative decisions of the subject. The decision is most fundamentally a response to the love of God flooding his or her own heart, but we should not lose sight of the fact that it is the subject who has to decide whether he or she is going to do the disagreeable and often painful work of cooperating with the grace of God. In Christian terms, of taking up its cross and following Christ. Regular decisions to cooperate with the love of God over time transform the way in which the subject experiences the world, since such decisions, inasmuch as they are truly cooperative, consistently refuse to settle with any unloving relations between the elements of their own experience. Through a series of cooperative decisions, the subject undoes and breaks free from habitual patterns, for instance, of seeing another person in pain and then failing to move one's own body, one's posture, hands, eyes, and mouth to attend to and care for that suffering person. In other words, the subject cooperating with the love of God systematically works into his or her own life a patterning of experience in which all of its elements are consistently and firmly linked together through the bond of love. Such cooperative decisions, in the words of St. Paul, do the work of taking every thought captive to make it obedient to Christ. Only through such a radical transformation, undertaken by the vigilant work of the deciding subject, supported by the grace of God, the love of God, does the human being completely become perfected in love, so that all of what she experiences is absorbed into that pattern of love. In the saint, love is what links together the elements of experience, and it is the saint who has, through the love of God, peeled away the scales from what Lonergan calls the eyes of love, and who experiences the world as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. It was great. Great exploration of these different experiences and the links between them. I liked the parallel of intelligent, unintelligent, loving, unloving. Very provocative. Anybody have questions for Robert? Going once. Dr. Byrne, Pat.
Thanks, Rob, for your presentation. I was wondering if you've given some further thought to the ways in which things like attention to questions, the seeking of insights, the seeking of judgments as processes get motivated on the one hand by being in love, and the other hand by decisions. You know, when a person makes a decision, I'm going to study, or I'm going to try to understand this book. Any thoughts on how that how the decision puts the operations in motion in a different way than when they're done spontaneously, just out of intellectual curiosity, for example?
Right. I think there's pretty significant. I mean, so like if you're going to make any of the freshman students whom I'm teaching right now, if they were going to decide, you know what, I need to change my life and I need to make rigorous study a kind of central aspect of my life. You know, they may have known they were going to do that when they got to college, but now they're actually settling into life at BC and trying to figure out kind of ordinary day-to-day sort of thing, where they're going to make that a central aspect of their life. And it's a confusing thing, especially during COVID, because they have to figure out where to study. You know, there's a lot of questions going into it for them about how to set up just an ordinary course of events within their life where they're able to have this value of learning as a central thing, right? A central thing that they're going to at least dedicate a significant amount of time to right now. So there are questions that come up for them as soon as they made that decision, right? There are questions that they have to ask about how they're going to, you know, where they're going to find time, what else they're going to do in their life, because clearly, although I would like it to be, study is not the only thing they're going to, you know, be focusing on. They're going to be focusing on other things too. So they're going to have other things that they're going to have to deliberate about, and that they're going to have to try to understand even just about their new circumstances at BC, their new living circumstances, where things are on campus. How to differentiate that from just a spontaneous question that arises. Well, it's interesting because spontaneous questions, they do arise, and I could just start wondering about something. But they also always arise within a context of living, right? So a person, if one of my students suddenly becomes enamored with philosophy or theology, and suddenly, you know, they have a question, well, I wonder what exactly was the relationship between Plato and Aristotle, right? That's a spontaneous question, but there's already a kind of context in which they've decided that learning is going to be, and study is going to be, a central value that they want to dedicate a lot of time and energy toward in their life at BC. I don't know if that's adequate, Pat. I feel like I'm talking to the master here.
No. That's fine. That's really interesting. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. Stephen, you have a question?
Yeah. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks for this, Rob. I'm teaching ethics right now, and this is really thought-provoking. One thing that doesn't come up much in Lonergan scholarship is Lonergan's relationship to the virtue tradition or virtue ethics. And there seems to be a relationship there through discernment. I think you spelled out a lot of that connection here in a really nice way. And specifically thinking about the way these recurrent decisions repattern our experience, and sort of on the note you ended with, so that we actually see the world as it is. And this is a very Aristotelian point, that the virtuous person not only is good, but also truly sees the world, which is something that's a little bit foreign to our contemporary way of, you know, thinking about ethics as following rules. Have you thought about that connection at all, or something to the effect of whether there's a kind of scheme of recurrence that we establish through these ongoing decisions and this effort at repatterning our experience?
Yes. So I've thought about it a little bit, and you've raised actually a number of questions, Stephen, so thank you. So one of the things that I think would definitely have to go into the scheme of recurrence that would allow one to see the world as it actually is, part of the thing that I would treat at far more length if this paper was, a lot longer, were, not just decision and experience, because that's kind of leaving out, a very firm middle ground that someone would actually need to go through and actually to be able to see the world or experience the world as it actually is, right? So when you are actually undergoing the process of purgation, right, to make your life more in conformity with the love of God, it requires intelligence to do that, right? You need to actually be able to discern within your own patterns, within the concrete patterns that make up your own life as a subject, the things that are good about those patterns, what needs to be refined in those patterns, and what needs to be totally eliminated from those patterns. So I'm using patterns in a more concrete sense here than Lonergan tends to use them, because he'll use them to kind of classify different areas. But I think you could use patterns sort of in a more concrete sense to talk about what's going on when the person is trying to discern how to restructure their lives, basically, how to restructure their experience of the world so that it's more in conformity with the love of God. That requires full intelligence, right? Asking and answering questions. And so part of the scheme of recurrence that would kind of be within that is a constant vigilance, right? A constant vigilance that's always going to be able to attend to the fact that one has a question here and is not going to ignore that question or is not going to push aside that question. Does that help, Stephen? I don't know if I answered all of your questions.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Michael, you have a question?
Robert, thanks for your paper. Dovetailing off your last answer to Stephen, I'm wondering, so Balthasar, when he's talking about purgatory, basically says it's probably some crazy vision from Adrian von Speyer, right? But he says you go to heaven and you sit in front of Jesus, and Jesus basically says, think about your life, think about your choices. And you have this long, uncomfortable conversation, kind of like a child might have with their parent after misbehaving. And at the end of that long, uncomfortable conversation, that's purgatory. You go to heaven. Congratulations. I guess I'm wondering if the purgative way, as you've talked about it in the paper, is kind of that, right? It's the relationship with Christ, sort of conforming you more and more through that ongoing being in love. And if that's the kind of thing that helps us to think about this, if that's an image that's helpful for us in thinking about this.
Yeah, it is really, that is a very helpful image. I actually don't know that part of von Balthasar. I'm always really struck, I think about it every now and then, but in Theodrama 5, where he starts talking about Christ's descent into hell and to the furthest extremities of hell, and what's going on there is he comes side by side with the sinner in the furthest extremity of hell, and identifies with them in order to bring them kind of fully back to heaven, right? It's a very kind of like imaginative, dramatic sort of thing. So just as the way you've kind of characterized it, I don't know the text, but just as the way you've characterized it with purgation or purgatory for von Balthasar, it seems like to me, if you would have, I'm fully on board with purgatory. I don't think just a conversation is significant enough. Even a conversation with Christ, there has to be the full kind of work of actually forming you as a human being, as a full human being, into that conformity with Christ. Now, whether a conversation just with Christ can do that alone, I'm sure God is powerful enough to do that. But it seems like if you're just going to talk about the things that are humanly required, more than a conversation would be necessary. But again, this is like something that maybe Christ could just do that through a conversation, probably can. So leave it there.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Great. We are just about up on time, so let's thank Robert again for a great paper, and thank John and Hannah as well. This was a wonderful session. Thank you all for attending.